Chapter 9 of Merton of the Movies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Merton of the Movies by Harry Leon Wilson. Chapter 9. More Ways Than One. Early he was up to bathe and shave. He shaved close to make it last longer, until his tender face reddened under the scraping. Probably he would not find another cabin in which a miner would part with his beard for an eastern trip. Probably he would have to go to the barber the next time. He also succeeded, with soap and water, in removing a stain from his collar. It was still a decent collar, not immaculate perhaps, but entirely possible. This day he took eggs with his breakfast, intending to wheedle his appetite with a lighter second meal than it had demanded the day before. He must see if this would not average better on the days overhead. After breakfast he was irresistibly drawn to view the moving picture of his old home being dismantled. He knew now that he might stand brazenly there without possible criticism. He found Jimmy and a companion property boy already busy. Much of the furniture was outside to be carted away. Jimmy, as Merton lolled idly in the doorway, emptied the blackened coffee pot into the ashes of the fireplace, and then proceeded to spoon into the same refuse heap half a kettle of beans upon which the honest miners had once feasted. The watcher deplored that he had not done more than taste the beans when he had taken his final survey of the place this morning. They had been good beans, but to do more than taste them would have been stealing. Now he saw them thrown away and regretted that he could not have known what their fate was to be. There had been enough of them to save him a day's expenses. He stood aside as the two boys brought out the cooking utensils, the rifle, the miner's tools, to stow them in a waiting handcart. When they had loaded this vehicle, they trundled it on up the narrow street of the western town. Yet they went only a little way, halting before one of the street's largest buildings. A sign above its wooden porch flaunted the name Crystal Palace Hotel. They unlocked its front door and took the things from the cart inside. From the street the watcher could see them stowing these away. The room appeared to contain a miscellaneous collection of articles needed in the ruder sort of photodrama. Emptying their cart, they returned with it to the cabin for another load. Merton Gill stepped into the doorway and peered in from apparently idle curiosity. He could see a row of saddles on wooden supports. There were kitchen stoves, lamps, painted chairs, and heavy earthenware dishes on shelves. His eyes wandered over these articles until they came to rest upon a pile of blankets at one side of the room. They were neatly folded, and there were many. Down before the cabin he could see the handcart being reloaded by Jimmy and his helper. Otherwise the street was empty. The young man at the doorway stepped lightly in and regarded the windows on either side of the door. He sauntered to the street and appeared to be wondering what he would examine next in this curious world. He passed Jimmy and the other boy returning with the last load from the cabin. He noted at the top of the load the mattress on which he had lain for 3 nights and the blankets that had warmed him. But he was proved not to be so helpless as he had thought. Again he knew where a good night's rest might be had by using ordinary discretion. Again that day, the 4th of his double life, he went the mad pace, a well-fed, carefree youth, sauntering idly from stage to stage, regarding nonchalantly the joys and griefs, the twistings of human destiny there variously unfolded. Not only was he this to the casual public notice, to himself he was this, at least consciously. True, in those nether regions of the mind so lately discovered and now being so expertly probed by science, in the mind's dark basement, so to say, a certain unlovely fronted dragon of reality would issue from the gloom where it seemed to have been lurking and force itself upon his notice. This would be at oddly contented moments when he least feared the future, when he was most successfully being to himself all that he must seem to others. At such times, when he leisurely walked a world of plenty and fruition, the dragon would half emerge from its subconscious lair to chill him with its head composed entirely of repellent facts. Then a stout effort would be required to send the thing back where it belonged, to those lower, decently hidden levels of the mind life. And the dragon was cunning. From hour to hour, growing more restive, it employed devices of craft and subtlety. As when Merton Gill, carefree to the best of his knowledge, strolling lightly to another point of interest, graciously receptive to the pleasant life about him, would suddenly discover that a part of his mind without superintendence had for some moments been composing a letter, something that ran in effect: "Mr. Gashwiler, dear sir, I have made certain changes in my plans since I first came to sunny California, and getting quite a little homesick for good old Simsbury, and I thought I would write you about taking back my old job in the Emporium, and now about the money for the ticket back to Simsbury. The railroad fare is—" He was truly amazed when he found this sort of thing going on in that part of his mind he didn't watch. It was scandalous. He would indignantly snatch the half-finished letter and tear it up each time he found it unaccountably under way. It was surely funny the way your mind would keep doing things you didn't want it to do. As, again, this very morning when, with his silver coin out in his hand, he had merely wished to regard it as a great deal of silver coin, a store of plenty against famine, which indeed it looked to be under a not too minute scrutiny. It looked like as much as $2.50, and he would have preferred to pocket it again with this impression. Yet that rebellious other part of his mind had basely counted the coin even while he eyed it approvingly, and it had persisted in shouting aloud that it was not $2.50, but $1.85. The counting part of the mind made no comment on this discrepancy. It did not say that this discovery put things in a very different light. It merely counted, registered the result, and ceased to function, with an air of saying that it would ascertain the facts without prejudice, and you could do what you liked about them. It didn't care. That night a solitary guest enjoyed the quiet hospitality of the Crystal Palace Hotel. He might have been seen, but was not, to effect a late evening entrance to this snug inn by means of a front window which had, it would seem, at some earlier hour of the day, been unfastened from within. Here a not too luxurious but sufficing bed was contrived on the floor of the lobby, from a pile of neatly folded blankets at hand, and a second night's repose was enjoyed by the lonely patron, who again at an early hour of the morning, after thoughtfully refolding the blankets that had protected him, was at some pains to leave the place as he had entered it without attracting public notice, perchance of unpleasant character. On this day it would not have been possible for any part of the mind whatsoever to misvalue the remaining treasure of silver coin. It had become inconsiderable, and even if kept from view, could be, and was, counted again and again by mere blind fingertips. They contracted, indeed, a senseless habit of confining themselves in a trousers pocket to count the $half, the quarter, and the 2 dimes long after the total was too well known to its owner. Nor did this total, unimpressive at best, long retain even these poor dimensions. A visit to the cafeteria in response to the imperious demands of a familiar organic process resulted in less labor by 2 dimes for the stubbornly reiterative fingertips. An ensuing visit to the Holden Lot barber, in obedience to social demands construed to be equally imperious with the physical, reduced all subsequent counting, whether by fingertips or a glance of the eye, to barest mechanical routine. A single $50 is easy to count. Still, on the following morning there were 2 coins to count. True, both were dimes. A diligent search among the miscellany of the Crystal Palace Hotel had failed to reveal a single razor. The razor used by the miner should in all reason have been found, but there was neither that nor any other. The baffled seeker believed there must have been crooked work somewhere. Without hesitation he found either Jimmy or his companion to be guilty of malfeasance in office. But at least one item of more or less worried debate was eliminated. He need no longer weigh mere surface gentility against the stern demands of an active metabolism. A shave cost $0.25. 20 cents would not buy a shave, but it would buy at the cafeteria something more needful to anyone but a fop. He saw himself in the days to come, if there were very many days to come of which he was now not too certain, descending to the unwholesome artistic level of the elder Montague. He would, in short, be compelled to peddle the brush. And of course as yet it was nothing like a brush, nothing to kindle the eye of a director needing genuine brushes. In the early morning light he fingered a somewhat gaunt chin and wondered how long they would require to grow. Not yet could he be taken for one of those actors compelled by the rigorous exactions of creative screen art to let nature have its course with his beard. At present he merely needed a shave. And the collar had not been improved with usage. Also, as the day wore on, coffee with 1 egg proved to have been not long enduring fare for this private in the army of the unemployed. Still, his morale was but slightly impaired. There were always ways, it seemed, and the later hours of the hungry afternoon were rather pleasantly occupied in dwelling upon one of them. The sole guest of the Crystal Palace Hotel entered the hostelry that night somewhat earlier than was usual, indeed at the very earliest moment that foot traffic through the narrow street seemed to have diminished to a point where the entry could be effected without incurring the public notice which he at these moments so sincerely shunned. After a brief interval inside the lobby he issued from his window with certain objects in hand, one of which dropped as he clambered out. The resulting clamor seemed to rouse far echoes along the dead street, and he hastily withdrew with a smothered exclamation of dismay about the nearest corner of the building until it could be ascertained that echoes alone had been aroused. After a little breathless waiting he slunk down the street, keeping well within friendly shadows, stepping softly until he reached the humble cabin where so lately the honest miners had enacted their heart tragedy. He jerked the latch string of the door and was swiftly inside, groping a way to the fireplace. Here he lighted matches, thoughtfully appropriated that morning from the cafeteria counter. He shielded the blaze with one hand, while with the other he put to use the articles he had brought from his hotel. Into a tin cooking pot with a long handle he now hastily ladled well-cooked beans from the discarded heap in the fireplace by means of an iron spoon. He was not too careful. More or less ashes accompanied the nutritious vegetables as the pot grew to be half full. That was a thing to be corrected later and at leisure. When the last bean had been salvaged, the flame of another match revealed an unsuspected item, a half loaf of bread nestled in the ashes at the far corner of the fireplace. It lacked freshness, was, in truth, withered and firm to the touch, but doubtless more wholesome than bread freshly baked. He was again on his humble cot in the seclusion of the Crystal Palace Hotel. Half reclining, he ate at leisure. It being inadvisable to light matches here, he ate chiefly by the touch system. There was a marked alkaline flavor to the repast, not unpleasantly counteracted by a growth of vegetable mold of delicate lavender tints which nature had been decently spreading over the final reduction of this provender to its basic elements. But the time was not one in which to cavil about minor infelicities. Ashes wouldn't hurt anyone if taken in moderation. You couldn't see the mold in a perfectly dark hotel, and the bread was good. The feast was prolonged until a late hour, but the fingertips that had accurately counted money in a dark pocket could ascertain in a dark hotel that a store of food still remained. He pulled the blankets about him and sank comfortably to rest. There was always some way. Breakfast the next morning began with the promise of only moderate enjoyment. Somehow, in the gray light sifting through the windows, the beans did not look as good as they had tasted the night before, and the early mouthfuls were less blithesome on the palate than the remembered ones of yesterday. He thought perhaps he was not so hungry as he had been at his first encounter with them. He delicately removed a pocket of ashes from the center and tried again. They tasted better now. The mold of tender tints was again visible, but he made no effort to avoid it. For his appetite had reawakened. He was truly hungry and ate with an entire singleness of purpose. Toward the last of the meal his conscious self feebly prompted him to quit, to save against the inevitable hunger of the night. But the voice was ignored. He was now clay to the molding of the subconscious. He could have saved a few of the beans when reason was again enthroned, but they were so very few that he fatuously thought them not worth saving. Might as well make a clean job of it. He restored the stewpan and spoon to their places and left his hotel. He was fed. Today something else would have to happen. The plush hat cocked at a rakish angle, he walked abroad with something of the old confident swagger. Once he doubtfully fingered the sprouting beard, but resolutely dismissed a half-formed notion of finding out how the Holden lot barber would regard a proposition from a new patron to open a charge account. If nothing worse than remaining unshaven was going to happen to him, what cared he? The collar was still pretty good. Why let his beard be an incubus? He forgot it presently in noticing that the people arriving on the Holden lot all looked so extremely well fed. He thought it singular that he should never before have noticed how many well-fed people one saw in a day. Late in the afternoon his explorations took him beyond the lower end of his little home street, and he was attracted by sounds of the picture drama from a rude board structure labeled the High Gear Dance Hall. He approached and entered with that calm ease of manner which his days on the lot had brought to a perfect bloom. No one now would ever suppose that he was a mere sightseer or chained to the Holden lot by circumstances over which he had ceased to exert the slightest control. The interior of the High Gear Dance Hall presented nothing new to his seasoned eye. It was the dance hall made familiar by many a smashing five-reel western. The picture was, quite normally, waiting. Electricians were shoving about the big light standards, cameras were being moved, and bored actors were loafing informally at the round tables or chatting in groups about the set. One actor alone was keeping in his part. A ragged, bearded, unkempt elderly man in red shirt and frayed overalls, a repellent fell hat pulled low over his brow, reclined on the floor at the end of the bar, his back against a barrel. Apparently he slept. A flash of remembrance from the Montague girl's talk identified this wretched creature. This was what happened to an actor who had to peddle the brush. Perhaps for days he had been compelled to sleep there in the interests of dance-hall atmosphere. He again scanned the group, for he remembered too that the Montague girl would also be working here in God's great outdoors. His eyes presently found her. She was indeed a blonde hussy, short-skirted, low-necked, pitifully rouged, depraved beyond redemption. She stood at the end of the piano, and in company with another of the dance hall girls who played the accompaniment, she was singing a ballad, the refrain of which he caught as "God calls them angels in heaven, we call them mothers here." The song ended, the Montague girl stepped to the center of the room, looked aimlessly about her, then seized an innocent bystander, one of the rough characters frequenting this unsavory resort, and did a dance with him among the tables. Tiring of this, she flitted across the room and addressed the board director, who impatiently awaited the changing of lights. She affected to consider him a reporter who had sought an interview with her. She stood erect, facing him with one hand on a hip, the other patting and readjusting her blonde coiffure. "Really," she began in a voice of pained dignity, "I am at a loss to understand why the public should be so interested in me. What can I say to your readers? I, who am so wholly absorbed in my art that I can't think of hardly anything else. Why will not the world let us alone? Hold on, don't go." She had here pretended that the reporter was taking her at her word. She seized him by a lapel, to which she clung while with her other arm she encircled a post, thus anchoring the supposed intruder into her private affairs. "As I was saying," she resumed, "all this publicity is highly distasteful to the artist, and yet since you have forced yourself in here, I may as well say a few little things about how good I am and how I got that way. Yes, I have 9 motor cars, and I just bought a lace tablecloth for 1,200 bones." She broke off inconsequently, poor victim of her constitutional frivolity. The director grinned after her as she danced away, though Merton Gill had considered her levity in the worst of taste. Then her eye caught him as he stood modestly back of the working electricians, and she danced forward again in his direction. He would have liked to evade her, but he saw that he could not do this gracefully. She greeted him with an impudent grin. "Why, hello, Trooper! As I live, the acting kid!" She held out a hand to him, and he could not well refuse it. He would have preferred to upstage her once more, as she had phrased it in her low jargon, but he was cornered. Her grip of his hand quite astonished him with its vigor. "Well, how's everything with you? Everything Jake?" He tried for a show of easy confidence. "Oh, yes, indeed, everything is." "Well, that's good, kid." But she was now without the grin, and was running a practised eye over what might have been called his production. The hat was jaunty enough, truly a hat of the successful, but all below that, the not too fresh collar, the somewhat rumpled coat, the trousers crying for an iron despite their nightly compression beneath their slumbering owner, the shoes not too recently polished, and, more than all, a certain hunted though still defiant look in the young man's eyes seemed to speak eloquently under the shrewd glance she bent on him. "Say, listen here, old timer. Remember, I been trouping man and boy for over 40 year, and it's hard to fool me. You working?" He resented the persistent levity of manner, but was coerced by the very apparent real kindness in her tone. "Well," he looked about the set vaguely in his discomfort. "You see, right now I'm between pictures. You know how it is." And she searched his eyes and spoke in a lower tone. "Well, all right, but you needn't blush about it, kid." The blush she detected became more flagrant. "Well, you see," he began again, but he was saved from being explicit by the call of an assistant director. "Miss Montague! Miss Montague! Where's that Flips girl? On the set, please." She skipped lightly from him. When she returned a little later to look for him, he had gone. He went to bed that night when darkness had made this practicable, and under his blankets whiled away a couple of wakeful hours by running tensely dramatic films of breakfast, dinner, and supper at the Gashwiler home. It seemed that you didn't fall asleep so quickly when you had eaten nothing since early morning. Never had he achieved such perfect photography as now of the Gashweiler corned beef hash and light biscuits, the Gashweiler hot cakes and sausage, and never had Gashweiler so impressively carved the Saturday night 4-rib roast of tender beef. Gashweiler achieved a sensational triumph in the scene, being accorded all the close-ups that the most exacting of screen actors could wish. His knife work was perfect. He held his audience enthralled by his technique. Mrs. Gashweiler, too, had a small but telling part in the drama tonight, only a character bit, but one of those poignant bits that stand out in the memory. The subtitle was, "Merton, won't you let me give you another piece of the mince pie?" That was all, and yet, as screen artists say, it got over. There came very near to being not a dry eye in the house when the simple words were flashed beside an insert of thick, flaky-topped mince pies with quarters cut from them to reveal their noble interiors. Sleep came at last while he was regretting that lawless orgy of the morning. He needn't have cleaned up those beans in that silly way. He could have left a good half of them. He ran what might have been considered a split-reel comedy of the stewpan's bottom, still covered with perfectly edible beans, lightly protected with nature's own pastel-tinted shroud for perishing vegetable matter, and diversified here and there with casual small deposits of ashes. In the morning something good really did happen. As he folded his blankets in the gray light, a hard object rattled along the floor from them. He picked this up before he recognized it as a mutilated fragment from the stale half-loaf of bread he had salvaged. He wondered how he could have forgotten it, even in the plenitude of his banquet. There it was, a mere nubbin of crust, and so hard it might almost have been taken for a petrified specimen of prehistoric bread. Yet it proved to be rarely palatable. Its flavor was exquisite. It melted in the mouth. Somewhat refreshed by this modest cheer, he climbed from the window of the Crystal Palace with his mind busy on 2 tracks. While the letter to Gashweiler composed itself, with especially clear directions about where the return money should be sent, he was also warning himself to remain throughout the day at a safe distance from the door of the cafeteria. He had proved the wisdom of this even the day before that had started with the bounteous breakfast. Today the aroma of cooked food occasionally wafted from the cafeteria door, and would prove, he was sure, to be more than he could bear. He rather shunned the stages today, keeping more to himself. The collar, he had to confess, was no longer, even to the casual eye, what a successful screen actor's collar should be. The sprouting beard might still be misconstrued as the whim of a director sanctified to realism. Every day it was getting to look more like that. But no director would have commanded the wearing of such a collar except in actual work where it might have been a striking detail in the apparel of an underworldling, one of those creatures who became the tools of rich but unscrupulous roués who are bent upon the moral destruction of beautiful young screen heroines. He knew it was now that sort of collar. No use now in pretending that it had been worn yesterday for the first time. End of chapter 9.